more than 100 unique styles of beer, each with their own set of ingredients, process, guidelines, history, and experience. If you're a beer lover, an industry leader, or somewhere in between, a better knowledge of beer style will improve your life and your work.
Welcome to A Sense of Beer Style, essential beer style training for those who want to lead in food and beverage. I'm Julia Herz.
And I'm Jeremy Storton.
We're advanced Cicerones, beer judges, home brewers, and we're excited to guide you through the vast and wonderful world of beer styles.
Welcome, everyone, to yet another episode of Sense of Beer Style. And Jeremy and I are here for you and with you and excited to enter the foray of historical beer under the Beer Judge Certification Program guidelines. And the key of historical beers is these are styles that maybe almost died out and then they have been resurrected. So what we know about them is kind of that recreation component of these beer styles. And the first one listed under historical beer styles, which frankly, I am definitely seeing more of these in the US with US craft brewers and home brewers on the scene, are Kellerbiers. And so I'm going to set it up. Jeremy's going to talk about the broad depth of ingredients because it's not just one style that Kellerbiers are fully based on. They're anchored, though, on more of traditional Marzen, German-style Marzen beers, but they can expand, and Kellerbiers is more of almost an approach, right, to Munich Helles and dark lagers. They definitely have some guardrails, though, and guidelines. They're often more heavily hopped. They're definitely going to be cloudier. This is the traditional German style before it was kind of recreated, was mostly if you were drinking a Kellerbier, and the example I have is totally not this, matured in wood casks, right, with the yeast still active, which actually mine is can conditioned. And then they would have the bung or spung not tightened. And so it would allow, while it was fermenting and finishing and conditioning, to have the CO2 expel. So you didn't have that wood vessel exploding per se, and the gas escapes. But these are lower carbonated, definitely yeasty, unfiltered, cloudy beers. And they were inspired by the Marzen approach and the Kellerbier approach from Franconia and kind of central Bavaria. Keller means cellar. That's an easy way to remember it. And they were often drinking right out of the cask, right? Drinking in and enjoyed in earthenware, kind of that stoneware that was somewhat had some porosity. Stoneware would not be clear. So think of people in Germany with those steins that you see, and that earthenware is classically what this cellar beer would be drinking and enjoyed out of. And so with that, I'm going to have Jeremy set us up on some ingredients while I open an example that is a little out of the range, but also fun to tie into the discussion today.
Yeah, and we'll talk about that in just a second. A great way to think about this is a Kellerbier is not a specific style. It's more about a way of serving a beer. It's we could also call it a Zwickel beer. When you pull beer off of the little swirly tube off of the conditioning tank, it would fit in the category of a cask ale sort of thing. It's more about how it's served and less about the style of beer that it is specifically. And so really when we say a cellar beer, we're talking about beer that has not fully fermented yet. It has not hit its stride yet. And that in itself is just kind of an interesting flavor profile to go with. So when we talk about ingredients, when we talk about a Kellerbier, we need to talk about the base style. It could be a Helles, it could be a Dunkel, it could be a Märzen, it could be a Pilsner. And so if you want to know the specific ingredients for that Kellerbier version of those styles, then you have to go back to those Stylecasts because it's all going to be a little bit different. But just keep in mind that this is more about the process than the ingredients that go into it. This is just a beer that we can't wait to drink. So we're going to get into it a little bit early is how I think about it. Let's talk about appearance now that you have one poured.
Yeah, and I've got my camera kind of angled so you can just see that collar of foam building. Yeah. Very robust and beautiful. That'll slowly collapse as I pour and top off a little bit more. And I literally will be able to get this 12-ounce can all the way in this glass as the collar of foam collapses and then rebuilds. But appearance, depending on the base style, is going to be reflective of that. But you're looking for often that hazy or cloudiness, which will definitely reflect that kind of bottle tanked condition type of beer, but it shouldn't be murky. And I love that mention because, I'm judging beers for a style. Murky to me means muddy. Murky means so cloudy. It's not even juicy or hazy. A lot of those beers are sometimes go too far. You want it to still be, you could see something through it. I can see
Mhm.
my hand through this. That's a good thing. And so that's, you don't want it murky. I've
Yeah.
got a thing about murkiness, I guess.
Yeah.
And then you've got also a little bit often darker in appearance than the base style is what the guidelines call for. My guess on the reasoning of that is that you've got a real essence of that yeast darkening up the hues and being much more visibly present.
Yeah. And it's important to note that this can be a little bit hazy. It can be have some of that presence in there because the beer's not done. And so there is going to be a little bit of that left over. And in that note, when we get to aroma, we're going to smell that base beer. If it's, like I said, if it's a Helles, a Märzen, a Dunkel, whatever it is, we're going to smell those notes of it, but we're also going to get that smell of yeast character, which in the final product of these beer styles, they should have very clean fermentation profiles. They should be very low, if any, esters, phenols. I mean, German lagers in general are noted for having a very clean fermentation style. With these Kellerbiers, we're going to get a lot of fermentation character compared to their counterparts. And that's because there's still yeast. It's active. It smells like a little bit like a bakery or a brewery that's actively fermenting. All of those aromas are going to come back to your flavor memories, your aroma memories, and just let you know that, yes, we have extra flavor in this thing. And I think that's why it's so kind of intriguing to go taste a beer before it's completely done, because this is the chance to taste things that we don't normally taste. Um, yeah, so that's really what this is going to kind of amount to be when we get into aroma. What about flavor? Does that translate to flavor?
It does, and so I think this is a harder one to study because you'd be able to cheat, so to speak, and explain to people that you really would wanna be describing the base style, but maybe darker versions are richer in that malt. More bitter is common with these beers, more hoppy focused in flavor, aroma, and bitterness from the base style to these Keller beer styles. So I think that's kind of where to anchor. This says fully fermented, clean fermentation profile, should not have eggy, buttery, or apple like or similar flaws. I will say, interesting pouring this in the studio here. It's a closed room, very small if I were to show you how little I can move around. And last night I had 2 of these beers, Jeremy, and I was just having a Friday night of like, wow, work week's over. Hells yeah, let's have some beers.
I can't
And
wait. I can't wait to record more episodes.
right, and lo and behold, we're doing Keller beer today, where I'm able to serve this STS pills from Russian River, and I get a snatch of sulfur. I get a snatch of light. I don't want it all the way to go to eggy, right? Gaseous is a
Hmm.
polite way to put it. I'm not getting that, but it is more expressive than say the style guidelines call for. So this is definitely would not judge well if I was doing it on the sheet. But flavor wise, let me tell you something. But wait a minute, take a beat. I got to tell you something after I take a sip. I am working, and I've already brewed one of these beers to perfect and rebrew this exact beer, or also the Firestone Walker from California's version, where they collaborated with Russian River, the Pivo Pills. These are those hoppy Pilsners that American craft brewers are taking, and that Keller beer aspect to me is totally there. Also, what's in this example, and I can't help but at least mention it, although don't let it screw up your style guideline study, is a French hop that I've been working with Armitage hops.
Hmm.
It's such a beautiful expression. Charlie Papazian himself turned me onto this hop through his recipes, and that to me is key. I've literally just brewed one of these with Armitage hops, and we're going to see where it goes. And so the expression of hops and the flavor on a Helles, because this is an example of a Helles, is supposed to be there in a pleasing, not dominant way. And I'm definitely getting that from the base style. And then also, too, because this is a Helles example, it's a beautiful expression of German Pilsner malt as well.
Yeah, one of the things that I want to throw out there too is, if you taste a Keller beer or a Zwickel beer, where it's not going to be done, so we can expect and have some mercy on some flavor components that the flavors formerly known as off flavors. But if we were looking, you mentioned eggy or even like sulfury matchstick type of flavors. If it's subtle, okay, great, no problem. That's part of the flavor. It's still working on it. If you have a little bit of diacetyl or butter flavor or acetaldehyde, green apple or tomato soup type of flavors, that's fine because the beer's not done. If it's too much, then well, maybe we got into it a little too soon. But if there's just a little bit of those flavors in there, well, enjoy it.
And
You know,
I'm gonna add to that because I love that you're pointing this out. When Jeremy says it's not done, what he means is modern, right? We're now historical with the recreations,
yeah,
packaged versions of this because we are not drinking this straight at the brewery from the cask, and it's not even wooden aged. They're developing. They're developing because they're bottle conditioned with a charge of yeast either in that can, keg, or bottle. That's what Jeremy means when he
yeah,
says it's not done. And so having a 3-month earlier version of this, I might not have gotten that snatch of sulfur, right? And so it is a developing beer when you have bottle conditioned or can conditioned beers, and it's a really important point.
yeah, perfect. Thank you for that. When we get to mouthfeel, think about this, folks. We have this beer. There's still yeast moving. We're not at that point where we're going to have this international lager. It's crystal clear and everything's done. It's been maturing for months versus green beer. We just got done fermenting it. Somewhere in between, we're going to catch this beer. There's still some yeast active in there. That yeast is going to turn into a little bit more body. It's going to be a little bit more creamier in the mouthfeel because we still have some yeast in there. But because as I said, the yeast isn't done, well, that carbonation isn't going to be quite as high as we'd expect from its counterparts because there's still some activity going on there. Um, and you're right. That's not to say that that this is supposed to be something that's done that's clear and devoid of any yeast character. This is just part of that charm of capturing it while it's still alive. And I think about like lettuce when it's fresh from the farmer's market and green, vibrant and alive versus like the day before we throw it out. That's kind of what this beer is supposed to be, is that live green type of beer. But that's going to translate into having a little bit lower carbonation, a little bit more creaminess, and so kind of expect that. What if you love a Helles? This is going to be just a creamier, lower carbonated version of that Helles with some uh, aliveness to it, if you will. But that's mouthfeel. Let's talk about. We can't really talk much about style comparisons, but what do you want to throw out there?
Just to reinforce what I kind of already said to you, that if you are studying this style guideline, it's going to have more flavor profile from that extra charge of yeast. It's going to have probably be more hoppy. It will have then, thus, more mouthfeel, more density to it, and it's going to be often cloudier than your commercial examples that are not the Keller example.
Yeah.
Those are just base grounding principles.
Yeah, and it does beg the conversation that you and I had before we recorded is these are beers that they're basically the German cask beers or the Zwickel beers or along those lines. So if we put that beer in a can and then send it out, is it still a Kellerbier or has it had a chance to mature? And that's a debate that I'm sure we'd go back and forth on, but it just kind of brings up the idea of, well, at what point is it just right to drink? You know what I
And
mean?
Jeremy, on this still, I think it's good to talk about the difference between Keller and Zwickel. I mean, Zwickel means you're like pigtailing, you're pulling straight from
Yeah,
the tank or the cask. Keller beer, yes, I've said traditionally these were served from the cask, but that's not the modern day version of a Keller beer. Modern day version of a Keller beer is often developing further. It is that same Zwickel beer physically pulling out of the tank is Zwickel, right?
yeah,
But the
yeah, yeah.
Keller version is bottle keg or conditioned with that yeast charge, more hoppy, and the like. So that's kind of the difference to also note.
Gotcha. And I group them together because there is so much overlap. I mean
Exactly. They're used
yeah,
interchangeably and but yet it's worth denoting when there is a physical technical difference.
yeah. When we get to commercial examples, this is kind of a fool's errand. But what I will share a little bit of advice is if you're looking for uh, if you're looking for it at a craft brewery, it has this sort of thing, or even in a can or a bottle, if you find them, if you look for the words Kellerbier with a K, Kellerbier, or even Naturtrube, it's like nature without the E, and then you add trube, and there's a umlaut or 2 dots above the U. That's Naturtrube. If you find those words on a beer, chances are you've stumbled upon some variation of a Kellerbier. You ought to buy at least a couple and try them and see how they go for you. Um, and then let's demystify what numbers we would, the whole conversation about numbers. We really don't have them for this.
Yeah, so I don't think we need to go over vital statistics, which is a part, and you notice if you listen to our show regularly, we're going over the BJCP style guidelines in order, although Jeremy and I add glassware, temperature, and pairing at the end.
Yeah.
So the vitals, you're just going to want to look at those base beer styles, like a Marzen, like a Helles, like a dark lager, and that's where your vitals need to be.
Yeah, exactly. And with just understanding there's going to be a little bit changes in body and carbonation and stuff like that too.
Mm-hmm.
Glassware, whatever glassware I would enjoy, a Helles or a Pilsner or a Dunkel.
Right.
I'm going to go with a Willy Becker as one of my favorites to drink these out of. But you mentioned this too, that having those old earthenware steins with a lid that flips onto the top to keep the bugs out. What a fun way to drink beer, especially a beer like this. This is how beer used to be. This is how this used to be beer flavored beer, and now we've changed it up. What a fun way to drink with one of those earthenware steins.
Yep. And we've got serving temperature would also be very specific to the actual style,
Yeah.
but colder, because these are often lighter lagers. So I'm going to say colder temperatures from the fridge is great. And we'll go to pairing, Jeremy. You ready for that?
Yep. Take us in there.
I've got everything from kind of sharp white cheddar with my Helles, which again, it's going to be based on the style. The notion of baklava with that, drizzled honey and kind of flaky, fall apart kind of dough really comes to mind. So I'm going simple and light and kind of nashi foods instead of a main entree. This is hoppy enough too, where it stands on its own. You don't want it to be barreled over. You better pair it right, or it will get all junked up, and the nuance and delicacy will be taken away.
Yeah. When I think about Kellerbier, I'm also thinking rustic. So I'm thinking like minestrone soup with some rustic Italian bread. I'm thinking of a charcuterie meat and cheese board. It could even be, given the right one, like a Kellerbier Helles. I would love to have some tacos with like some barbacoa. Kind of
Nice.
I want to go with whatever region that we're pulling this food from. I kind of want to go to the rustic end of that stuff just to really dive into the flavors and kind of the culture of the flavor of culture out of it too. So that's where I would go with the pairing suggestions on this.
Awesome. Well, all I can say is hopefully we start to see more of these examples, and commercial examples are harder to find, but seek them out and brew it, as Jeremy always reminds us, on the home brewing level. And you can have your own too, for sure.
Yep. Otherwise, cheers.
Cheers. Be well, everybody.
Thank you for listening to A Sense of Beer Style, the essential beer style training for those who want to lead in food and beverage. With advanced Cicerones, me, Julia,
And me, Jeremy.
Tune into the next episode as we continue exploring the world of beer styles and what to make of them. We encourage you to listen to the prepisodes to build your foundation and better understand beer styles.
And before the next episode, I'd like to ask you to review the show and let us know what you'd like featured in upcoming episodes. Until next time, here's to you and your sense of beer style. Thank you for listening. Cheers.